I've been here for about 2 years now. October 8th is my anniversary. Currently, I lead a team of 10. And, I'm so happy to be here with JumpCrew CEO, Rob Henderson. So I'll pass it over to you, Rob, and let you introduce yourself.
Hey, well, I'm Rob, JumpCrew CEO. I, as you said, have been working with her for 2 years now. Super excited to get on and chat about things that we chat about pretty regularly, which is our perspective on sales. And congratulations on your almost 2-year anniversary. We're gonna have to celebrate next week.
Yeah.
That's pretty specific.
Yep, coming up.
Good to see you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. One thing before we jump into it, everybody please ask questions in the comments as we're talking. We will make sure to go through and answer them at the end. I'll kind of kick us off. So something that Rob and I talk about a lot is, art-based selling and then the science-based selling. So Rob, I just want to start off. Are you an artist or a scientist?
I'm definitely a scientist. I'm 100% scientist. As I'm sure you know, it's a good question. But for me, my perspective on selling is definitely all about figuring out the metrics, understanding the cadence and the process, and then measuring that. So I would definitely put myself squarely in the scientist category. What about you? What are you?
Yeah, somehow I had a feeling that was going to be your answer. I honestly, I think I'm probably a little bit more of an artist. But, there's that little bit of me that always has to kind of go back to that. Because I started, with very little sales experience, I started off as an artist, but now having all of your guidance and everybody at JumpCrew with the science-based approach, I really kept that in mind now moving forward as well.
Gotcha. Hopefully I still have time to influence you into the science camp a little bit further. And of course, I think both of us realize there's no salesperson that doesn't have some art and some science. I think it's more like where you veer than necessarily having to pick one. But it's really interesting to it's like, I think obviously managing people, you realize this. It's like you can always observe pretty quickly who's an artist and who's a scientist, and kind of it's interesting to see the way that different people are with it.
Yeah, definitely becoming a manager, you appreciate the science-based approach a lot more, and you realize how important that is to developing not just an effective sales strategy for yourself, but for your team as well, and really building that team. Things like speed to contact, number of call attempts, and persistence, and then the lead to opportunity conversion, opportunity to close ratio. Like those are things now that I realize are so much more important to build your foundation on than just having the natural talent of being a good salesperson.
And that's definitely one of the things, right? As you advance in your career, you realize that like art sometimes has to do with luck. Right. Mm-hmm. And so the challenge with that is just like, if you get lucky, great, you get lucky and you have a really talented team and the conditions are right and all that good stuff. But then when something goes wrong, you're like, uh-oh, I don't know what I don't know what I did. Whereas the science part of it is it's sort of like you're measuring so many different things that when you change something or something starts changing, you can look at it and start going, okay, well, here's exactly where it broke and here's how I'm going to fix it. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that way is a lot more scalable. Somebody just asked a question about the JumpCrew offices. So it's really funny. JumpCrew has a very large office space that we just brought online. It's about 70,000 square feet. And there's like 5 people here. So we get about 12,000 square feet to ourselves to do our thing. But we have an office here. It's obviously not mandatory for anybody to come in, but there's a lot of extra space. So if we're doing something like LinkedIn Live and we don't want the family or the puppies running around behind, we'll come to the office. But right now there's about 4 of us here. We've got plenty of space, and obviously we're being very careful and socially distant in the new office. And Emma, Jerry asked me, like, does the new office space help art or science? I think it's a good question. What do you think?
I mean, I think the new office space helps science, I would say, because being in the office, obviously, this is where our teams are going to grow at some point, right? And so we need to use that science to scale the teams and fill up this office when it's safe, I'll say. So that's my answer, is that we're going to build our teams based off the science-based approach so that we can fill up this office.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, interestingly, we're just like on the other sides of the spectrum today. It must be like a Friday thing. For me, having the ability to come into the office has helped my creativity a little bit. It's only been like 2 weeks since we've had the ability to come here. But what I found is that, like, sitting in the same room at home, I would get blocked on certain things. And so, like, I would be like, you know, just like there's like a business problem or something you're trying to solve. And, you know, between like going to my office upstairs and going to my bedroom downstairs and going to my office upstairs and going to my bedroom downstairs. And like, I have a little track where I went to get coffee 72 times today. But that sort of process, I felt like made it more difficult for me to use like the creative thinking side of my brain. So I'm glad to be fortunate enough to have, you know, a place where we can be socially distant, but still, you know, come into the office and just kind of change the environment for those of us that, you know, feel good about it. So yeah, it's been good for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one as well. It's definitely nice to kind of get out of the hamster wheel of your own home and be able to work in different spaces and things like that. So that definitely does help the creativity. Cool. I guess one thing like I wanted to touch on also, Rob, is that article. And like going back to one thing that I was thinking based on not just the blog post, but even just the beginning of our conversation this morning or afternoon, I guess now, is, you know, maintaining a higher level of success than where you're at, right? So you can be really, really successful as an artist or an artistic seller, right? But like, if you want to maintain that level of success, like why, in your opinion, what is the most important science-backed approach that they need to integrate into their sales?
I think it just starts with the ability to measure things and being comfortable with measuring things, right? And so there's an obvious reason why sometimes people aren't comfortable with measuring things. It's because you might not like the result of what you're measuring. And I think that's like a very 1.0 way of thinking. If they are your own results and you're willing to own your own results, then the insight that you get from seeing your results should be something that you personally, you know, as a human are willing and able and ready to manage. And so I think that's like the first part, is just getting really comfortable with thinking through like, okay, what do I need to measure? What's important to me? Mm-hmm. But when I first started at sort of the beginning of my career, I feel like I weighed heavily on the art side. And at a certain point, I felt like I got burnt by that. Because what happens is that if you're just thinking about the art side of selling, you know, how to be personable, how to drive a conversation, how to, you know, communicate value, how to articulate, you do reach a certain ceiling, right? There's going to be a certain point where you're not going to get that much better at that, especially if you're naturally talented. And then the other part is it's really hard to build a team that way. Like, are you just going to go out and, you know, hope that you're going to find a bunch of people who are super naturally talented? Like that's hard, right? But the reality is, if you take a more science-based approach and you take a more metrics-based approach, you start to be able to help yourself and other people learn how to measure the important parts of the process, and then incrementally get better at each specific thing. So it's hard to say like, oh, I'm going to get better at selling, but you can say, I'm going to get better at contacting my leads that come in right away. I'm going to prioritize that because I know that the science behind me contacting my leads within 5 minutes that they come in it's going to make me 400 times more successful. So all that you need to do, and Jerry says, I know that number. Yeah, I say that number like every day to everyone. But what you need to do is focus on getting better at contacting your leads really, really quickly. And right away, you've improved your game, so to speak. I'm a big basketball fan. You've improved your game just by doing something like that. Yeah,
no, definitely. And speed to contact obviously is number one, especially for, those inbound leads that are coming in. Like when I was, a rep and even as a sales manager now, if I see an inbound lead come in, it's like, all right, who's on it? Like we need to be on it within the first 5 minutes, preferably 30 seconds after it comes in, right? Always preaching that. And then, the second half of that is what happens after you don't get in touch with that lead on the first call, right? Like let's say, the first call you call within 5 minutes, but you don't get them, following the cadence and continuing to be persistent and continuing your outreach, like that's kind of that next part. So, I always preach, you're not maybe going to get in touch with them on the first 5 tries, right? You need to get to the 6th try, sometimes to the 11th try. And that's a big part of that as well.
Yeah, it really is. And there's so many good things that that came out of what you just said. But I think the most important part being all the way back to the beginning was like, you have to measure it. You have to know how long it's taking you to get in contact with them if you want to improve it. And that's really what it boils down to. But yeah, I'm sure, you and I have similar personality types. Sometimes I'm laying there at like 11:30 at night looking at my phone and I see an inbound lead come in. I'm like, oh man, I want to call this one. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I shouldn't do that. But yeah, it's definitely very important. So Titch asked an interesting question. He said, do you find it challenging selling companies that aren't keen to being sold? Does the science way of selling work better to connect? And I'm going to guess you mean specifically with, does the science way of selling work better trying to connect with people who are maybe a little tired of being sold?
Yeah. So I would say that I have 2 parts to this. So the first part is, for me, the science way of selling is your foundation, right? And then on top of that, the icing on the cake is the art of selling and within the conversations that you have with these prospects when they come in, right? So I'm always going to follow the science-based approach, speed to contact, all of that to be able to get in touch with somebody. But once I'm having a conversation with someone, that's where you have to be an artist, right? You're not going to be a robot. You're not going to be someone who's like, I called you because I need one more opportunity to get to my pipeline, right? So it's a combination of both. I think people right now are definitely really hesitant on being sold. And that's why it's important to follow the science approach and then add in the art on top and really take a step back and do more consultative selling.
Yeah, there's so much there. I love the question because it's a really good one. So I don't like being sold. Nobody likes being sold. No. But I love having conversations with people. And so a lot of it is just the approach. If you have done no research on my company, no research on whether or not I want your product. Now we're getting into strategy, but I'll go down this one for a little while, right? And like, you're just calling me and you're like spitting out some, thing that you've read or written or whatever. And like, you're selling me and I don't want to have that conversation with you. Yeah. But if you want to have a conversation with me, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, no matter who you are or what you're doing. If I have time, I'll sit there and I'll chat with you. And so a lot of it is just the approach.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to the science of selling, like the beginning of that statement or the premise really goes down to the core of the science of selling, which is, if you've looked at a certain vertical or a certain product against a certain vertical, or a certain product against a certain vertical and against a certain geography, and you have made 400 phone calls, and every one of those phone calls tell you to buzz off because they're not keen on being sold, then that is the science of selling. You're barking up the wrong tree. And no amount of being good at talking in circles or talking around things, that's really like the old way of doing things. That's not how you optimize your sales process. How you optimize your sales process is you sit down, you look at the data, which means you actually have to track the data, and you say to yourself, okay, those 400 phone calls didn't work. And so I'm going to hypothesize that it's because of the size of business, or it's because of the geography of the business, or it's because of whatever. And I'm going to A/B test that against a different type of business, against a different geography, or maybe a different product offering. And I'm going to say to myself, okay, well, here I have a 1% conversion rate, and here I have a 0% conversion rate. So let me start optimizing this part of my pipeline, this part of my funnel. And as you do that, what you'll find, and this is why I love the science of it, is what you find is that your job becomes easier and easier and easier as a salesperson or a sales professional, because what happens is you're leaning into the momentum, you're leaning into people that want to talk to you in a market that wants to talk to you, and your own quality of life and your work product becomes so much better because you're riding that wave, as opposed to fighting uphill of like people that are like, dude, I don't know why you're calling me about plumbing supplies. I'm in a tech company, you know? It's like, what you honestly get a lot of the time.
Yeah, you're working more efficiently. You're not rolling that big cement ball up the hill anymore. You're skateboarding down the hill. And I think that's great. One question, Rob, that Rafa actually asked is, can you touch on rituals and any changes that happened due to COVID? So any of our, I'm assuming, rituals meaning, our normal processes that we kind of live, breathe, work for. And have we changed any of those processes or rituals from COVID?
I find the word rituals kind of funny, but I can imagine that coming from Rafa.
Yeah.
I can't really speak to it as much from a company perspective, because we could have a whole hour-long conversation about that. Obviously, a lot has changed. From an individual perspective, I find like my own process to be really important for me. I perform better when I follow a certain process. And what I mean by that is, I wake up at a certain time, read for a certain amount of time, hang out with my kid for a certain amount of time, drive to the office for a certain amount of time. Anybody that knows me knows I eat lunch every single day at the same time. I have my iced tea every single day at the same time, and so on and so forth. And that part of it it's sort of the anchor of my day and keeps me focused on the things that I need to focus on. And when I don't have that, I have at times struggled, because your day isn't anchored down the same way. And I remember about 60 days after COVID really impacted the world, having to sit down and say, okay, I need to rethink my process, because my personal process, my personal habits, because what I'm doing is not working for me, and I feel disoriented sometimes against my personal goals and the things that I'm trying to accomplish. So I need to sit down and rethink my personal, habits and processes. And that was certainly true as the company, but as the company, it was sort of obvious on day one that we needed to do that. I think as an individual, it was a little less obvious, and I really needed to sort of like rethink it. So it was an interesting turn of events for me. How about you? Are you?
So my personal rituals, yes, everything has been turned upside down. Obviously, needing to, something in the office that I noticed. This is the biggest thing. So when you're in an office pre-COVID, it's really easy and necessary to take a 15-minute break here and there. And it's easy to do so because you grab your buddy and say, hey, let's go outside. Let's go for a lap around the building, as we used to do at Dickerson, right? But when I transitioned to work from home, I found it harder and harder to take those breaks, because you're just locked in all day. So really actually just adding in scheduled time to let my brain breathe was one thing that was really important. I think also on the team side, because everything is virtual now. We've added in daily meetings. We have meeting cadences with one-on-ones now. And so those are now some of our new rituals, is having a virtual meeting every morning, or having a virtual one-on-one, a hangout like this every other week with everyone. So that's kind of both ends of the spectrum there, team and personal.
Yeah, Mike, we definitely missed the gong. And we know how you liked hitting it for sure, often. James has a really good question here. How strongly has COVID affected science-based aspect of outreach? The most strongly it could ever possibly affect anything. And here's what we found. I can share the sort of studies that we've done on it, but COVID created some very specific areas where there's a lot of opportunity, and it created some very specific areas where there's a lot of challenges. And if you're spraying and praying, and I'd love to hear about this with your team, Stephanie, because you guys did an amazing job of figuring this out really quickly. But if you're spraying and praying and just like calling random people and trying to get them to buy something for you, first of all, you're destroying your brand, because how insensitive would it be, to call a restaurant or a hotel up and ask them if they want to spend $100,000 on something when, they're going through the struggle of their life. So you don't want to do that. On the other hand, if you understand the verticals that really need your help, or really need your product, or really need your service, and you go directly after them, they needed it, and they needed it fast in a lot of cases. So I'll give you the example of like unified communications. All of a sudden, everybody's working from home. Everybody needs unified communications. Well, if you call all the hotels, they're just going to say, like, what are you talking about? There's no guests in our hotels. We don't need anything. But if you really understand that you call the office-based corporate businesses where they're really struggling to communicate with each other, and you offer them a solution to their problems, you're going to see your sales really take off. And so that habit of focusing on the metrics and understanding what's working for you, that COVID is a great highlight of that. And no amount of salespersonship will help you if you're calling hotels, as an example. So COVID was actually, kind of made it more obvious to me that this is the right way to go. How was it for your team, Izzi?
So I mean, it's exactly what you said. We had to get very specific in what verticals that we were reaching out to, right? Thinking about what types of businesses are still going to be in business, are still looking for customers, essential businesses. We have a very targeted military audience, so it's a little bit easier actually to be able to look up, what specifically is happening now within the military demographic because of COVID, and then targeting our verticals based on those updates and the news resources that we have to find out how that demographic and how the population is moving and changing. So that's one thing. It's also placed even more importance on the speed to contact of the inbound leads that we do receive, right? Like if we're struggling in terms of, or if your business or your team is struggling to find people who are interested, then when you get an inbound lead, right, like that's a very important lead, right? Because they're saying that they're interested. So it's placed emphasis on that. The biggest change that I've seen, or biggest thing that's been important also, is going to be the persistence and following the cadence, because a lot of times these businesses, if you're getting an inbound lead, they'll have put in their business phone number, but maybe they're working from home now, right? Or they're a real estate agent, they're not in the office. So reaching out multiple times, getting creative and finding, different phone numbers, different ways to reach out online as well. That all changed with COVID also. It takes more attempts sometimes to get in touch with people. People have changing business hours. All of those factors kind of combining makes that science even more important to continue to follow, to make sure that you're giving each lead your best effort.
Sounds like I'm bringing you over to the science side over here.
Honestly, yeah, you're starting to get, I think I'm convincing myself a little bit.
No, I know what you mean with the art and science thing. It's a leaning towards. So Dan asked an interesting question about are there aspects of a size of a business or industry or geography that that we look at when we go into selling? The answer to that is that every product is different. So it always changes, but for sure, it's always the first question that we have to ask ourselves. It's, okay, here's the product, here's the value that the product drives, but who does it drive the most value to? Like, who should I be calling? And also, what's their address, what's their phone number, and what's their email address? And so our process at JumpCrew is always that everything starts with data. We always start understanding who our buyer persona is, because that's the most important thing. And then we can craft outreach strategies around that. Then the other part of that is, like, once you've identified it, what we go with, Dan, is something called BANT. And I always butcher this one, but it's budget, authority, need, and timeline. I got it right this time. I'm sure you've trained on that a billion times, Stephanie. But so once we've identified the category of businesses that we want to go after, we're always, do they have the budget? Do they have the need? Do they have the authority? And do they have the timeline? Because if they don't have those four things, then they're unlikely to be buyers.
Absolutely. Yeah, I preach that every single time that, someone on my team converts an opportunity. I'm going to say, okay, where's their budget coming from? Who is the decision maker? Did you speak directly with them? Are there other key influencers that we might need to speak with? And I make sure that I run through all the BANT aspects before saying, okay, yes, this is a qualified opportunity. So yeah, definitely super, super important. One question that Laval actually just asked us, I like this question, Rob, what's the difference between a sales based on a relationship and a sale based on data? How has COVID pushed the need for data-powered selling? I'll let you take this one.
Man, every time somebody tells me about the relationship selling stuff, I just kind of yawn. and I know, I get it. People love to say, oh, well, it's more of a relationship sell and blah, 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 blah. And I understand it. In the right context, it is true in certain terms. The issue is that people sort of change that to mean that you don't need to do the top of the funnel work because it's a relationship sale. So how are you ever going to get the relationships if you're not doing the top of the funnel work? And so just the premise of the relationship selling side, it's like, yeah, as a person, as a sales professional, you should always be building relationships. And for me, when somebody says relationship selling, what they're really saying is that it's a long sales cycle. Mm-hmm. So it takes a long time to sell this particular product or service because the business has to get comfortable with you and your business before they do something. And those are usually high ticket items. But I don't think that we can rest on our, relationship selling laurels to mean that we shouldn't have activity in the top of the pipeline because it's a relationship. But if anything, we should have more activity on the top of the pipeline because it's going to require, longer sales cycles. So that's my take on it. I'm always a bit of a skeptic when people say, oh, well, I really don't want to do that top of the funnel work because this is a relationship sale. And I really think that every sale is a relationship sale. And as a sales professional, you should always be building relationships. And so I think that managing to performance indicators is always the best way of selling.
Yeah, agreed. And with that, like, my take on relationship selling is the same as yours, where it's like, okay, that's just saying that you're kind of just taking a really long time to make the sale. And, obviously it's different for different businesses, but I'm much more of a person who's relationships can mean different things, right? You don't have to have a 2-month-long relationship with someone necessarily. You have a week-long relationship with somebody and make the sale, right? And it doesn't have to drag out that long. So I guess it just kind of depends. But yeah, definitely asking for the business is more my style.
So you probably have gotten creative on this one. So Chris Jones asked, how do you celebrate your sales wins with your team in this remote environment? I can imagine, we can't have taco days anymore. We can't have the pizza and beer Fridays that we used to have all the time. What sort of things are you doing to celebrate?
Yeah, so we do daily, in our daily morning huddle, as I mentioned before, we have a 9 a.m. every day. We have an all unit huddle, 8:30 a.m. right before that. I have my team's huddle, and we do shout outs every single day for top performers, for great sales, great KPIs, and really try and, I think that's why salespeople do it, right? Like they like the recognition. And so I think that's really important, even if we're not in the office together, clapping for each other in person, clap for each other over the screen, right? So we definitely continue to do that. We have the winning channel in Slack that all the sales come through, that everybody will put, different emojis on. And then we do offer, we have different prizes as well, different spiffs, sales incentives that we, give to people, and it makes it also more competitive too.
Yeah, I see some of your spiffs go by in the Slack channel. I feel like I should get in on some of that. You get generous out there.
We did a treat yourself basket where it had like some bath stuff, an Uber Eats gift card. It had, just different things for a spa night kind of at home. So that was cool as well. Just getting creative with it.
Yeah, I think celebrating the wins is so important. It's so easy to not, especially when you're working virtually, that doing it just makes life a little bit more enjoyable, and it just makes your day go by faster. So I really like, just all the banter in the Slack channel, even just it seems like a virtual like conversation that we're constantly having in the winning channel. So I love to do that. Good. So a question here from a LinkedIn user is, what are ways to incentivize distributors? Any idea? I can't speak specifically to your business because I don't know about it, but philosophically, I always feel like the best way to incentivize people, groups, businesses, distributors, whoever it is to really think deeply about like how you're aligning with them. Right. And so, I learned very good lessons like by, my friend and colleague Adolfo, who you report to, Stephanie. And I've always really respected the way that he is always looking at what he thinks the salespeople's goals are and how he can align with them, how he can get them to their goals. And so if somebody has a monetary goal or responsibility goal, he's always thinking about how those two teams can mutually get to their goals. And all the meetings that I'm in with him about like incentivization and comp and things like that, that's what he always talks to me about. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the best way when you're aligned and it's sort of like, hey, if you guys hold up your end of the deal, I'm going to hold up my end of the deal. And if you win, I win. And if I win, you win. All of a sudden it just gets easier because you're all sort of on the same team and moving in the same direction. So I believe really strongly in that philosophically. And I think if you're trying to incentivize distributors, the first thing to do is to sit down and say like, okay, how are these distributors currently incented? And sometimes you'll find it's money. Sometimes you'll find it's not. Sometimes you'll find, they have a big bag of tools in their toolbox and you might not have the right share of voice or whatever it is, but trying to figure out how to make their lives easier and more productive, in my experience, will lead to a good result. But great question.
Yeah, it's not going to be a one size fits all. Definitely. That's just goes back with what you were saying.
Yeah. So Stephanie, I have a question for you. What are your top 3 when it comes to science? Like, what are the top 3 things that you look at every day that you're like, these 3 things have to be aligned for us to be successful?
Yeah. So every day I'm looking at my lead to opportunity conversion. How many, obviously, leads have we converted into ops? And then using that data, looking at different verticals, stuff like that, how many of those can we now continue to convert, right? So can we go back? Can we touch again? Can we use a different form of outreach to go back on the ones that maybe we didn't get to? And then moving forward, how can we improve that lead to opportunity conversion ratio? The second thing that I look at every day is the pipeline of my team. So this is something you taught me, Rob, but making sure that we have at least triple the amount of dollars in our pipeline that we need for the month to hit our goal. The rule of thirds, I preach it every single day, every day.
Works every time.
That is my absolute number one. I'd say that that's probably my number one thing I look at is the pipeline, how many ops are in there, what's the total value of those opportunities, and then going down and breaking that down a little bit more individually as well.
It's so hard to miss if you have 3x your pipeline. Really hard.
It would be very hard to miss. So the most successful people obviously have even more than that, but that's like my minimum expectation is going to have, triple your needed revenue in your pipeline. I think the last thing that I look at always is going to be, it's a mix. It's the speed to contact, and then it's going to be the persistence or the call attempts, right? The number of touches on individual leads and opportunities to make sure that those are getting worked correctly. And then if we have any leads that, have come in as inbounds that haven't been touched yet and they're in the new stage, I mean, that's a big no-no for my team, and they know that.
Yeah, those are really good ones. Those are great things to look at. I think out of all of those, probably the one I struggled with the most as a sales rep was call attempts. I always wanted to get everybody in like 2 or 3 touches, and if you didn't want to talk to me, then that's it. I'm out. I'm offended.
The best way to shut that down is to just make that 6th attempt. When your manager makes the 6th attempt, and then they get in touch with them, then that's how you won't do that again.
Yeah. Well, we now know, based on the research, that most people will not pick up in the 2nd or 3rd attempt, and that it is going to take 7 attempts. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to see the average touch on a sale, I think is 9. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need 9 touches for the average sale. But the average salesperson touches an account 4 times. And that's like super easy math. You're like, oh, okay. So if the exact same product and the exact same person would have just touched it like 3 or 4 more times, you would have probably had a different result. And, mm-hmm. and that's when I get to the point where I talk about like the science and the art, because you can get better at simply just figuring out how many times it takes you personally, because everyone's a little bit different, and just, call and email and LinkedIn people more, as opposed to like trying to figure out how to become more charismatic, which is, I would imagine a heavier lift.
A bit harder.
Yeah. So that's really interesting.
I was going to ask you the same question that you asked me, Rob. What are your top 3 that you focus on or prioritize?
Speed to contact is my number 1, and that is just absolutely 100% for me the most impactful thing if you're in an inbound environment, mm-hmm. because of the world that we live in. If you're on your computer filling out a form that you want something or you want information about something, you want it now. And we can all use ourselves as use cases. Like, you want it now, and you're not going to wait for it. More importantly, you're going to go and fill out another form if you don't get the information you want. So if you wait too long to get to them, your competitor has a very good chance of taking that customer. And then the other thing about that is just people usually have the best impression of the first person that they talk to. I think there's also some science around that you're most likely to buy the first thing that you engage with. So for me, it's speed to contact. The second one is going to definitely be op conversion for me. And activity to op conversion is either, do you have enough activities to reasonably create that 3x your pipeline to get to where you need to go? Or, are you good enough at creating ops that you don't need to do the activities, but you're still creating the same amount of ops? So for me, just that op creation, I think almost with any business that I've ever looked at, the standard is basically like 40 ops. If you're creating 40 ops a month, you're probably going to be pretty successful. And then the last one I look at is your opportunity to close ratio. And so if you have 40 opportunities and you're not closing any of them, clearly there's some value that you're not articulating, because this person was very interested and they had the budget, they had the need, they had the authority, and they had the timeline, and none of them converted. So those are the three things I look at. And the reason I look at them is because there's very specific things that you can do to help people get better at all three of those things. And so if we want our teams to improve and we look at those three things, then we can look at what areas of training and development they need to get better at those things.
Definitely. Yeah, that last point is a big one.
Glenn asked, how useful do you find tools like Salesforce and so on as a manager?
I live in Salesforce. I could not possibly do my job without Salesforce. Every single data point that we just spoke about, I use Salesforce to figure out and pull those data points. So it's absolutely imperative. It also keeps, our reps organized as well. Like, they need to be able to go back and see their touches that they've logged and organize their leads into how they're going to call for the day, or however they need to best organize those to be able to work all of those through the appropriate, number of touches. The reporting tool, I couldn't do it without our ops team, but they're very helpful as well in building out those reports for me to look at, the leads converted this month, the leads converted month over month. And that's going back to what Robert's saying about figuring out how to improve those trends and improve those numbers, and kind of base your coaching off of the data that you're finding month over month and week over week even. So the answer is, it's very useful, incredibly useful, the most useful.
Yeah. I mean, look, I couldn't agree more, because you hear me rant about it all the time. But the infrastructure that supports sales professionals today, I think, is really one of the most critical parts of making them successful. And looking through and really understanding what tools they need to be successful, I think is, I don't even want to say if I was half the battle, it might be 75% of the battle. And we've experienced that over and over and over here at JumpCrew, where sometimes it takes a while to figure out the automation tool, the emailing tool, the database tool, the CRM. But when you get all of those things together, it usually creates an environment for success. So I think that the technology is one of the most important pieces of the equation here. So we're definitely running up on time here, and so I had one last question for you that I really like to think about, which is, what do you think is the single most underrated skill that a sales professional can have from your perspective?
Okay. Are we talking skill as in like a hard skill, like, technology wise, or a skill?
You get to choose whatever skill you like.
I will say grit 10 out of 10 times. And I don't know if you can really count that as a skill, because, anybody can have grit really, but like the most successful people they're just going to work harder and harder and harder and power through the nose and just grind it out. And those are the people that I want on my team. I'm sure that those are the people that, Rob, we want, within JumpCrew. And I'm going to count that as a skill, because I do think it is something that you can get better at too. It is working harder and kind of having that mental fortitude and that grit to just keep going, keep improving, keep calling, keep getting to the no.
I'm so upset right now because you picked a really good one. I'm feeling competitive. I thought
Same question back to you. What is the number one?
But that one is definitely true. Like, great, I think trumps everything. Like, if you're willing to just go at it and go at it again and go at it again and go at it again, at some point you end up winning, because the objections of the world get tired and you just end up winning. Yep. My single most underrated skill that I think salespeople can have, and I think it is a skill as well, but it's sort of like yours. It's not like a hard skill. It's just like it's a softer skill. And for me, that's gratitude. I think that people who communicate from a perspective of gratitude always get a better reception from their audience. And so what I used to think about when I was rep was, if I communicate every single time that I'm talking to somebody that I'm grateful that they're willing to spend their time with me, that I'm grateful that they picked up the phone, that I'm grateful that they responded to their email, like that communication of gratitude is something that resonates with people very, very well. And it's hard to be mad at somebody who's grateful for the opportunity, just grateful to talk to you, grateful to just engage, or grateful to be able to represent their company, or grateful to be able to breathe, however you communicate that gratitude. I feel like gratitude is a skill. It's like you can get better at being grateful for opportunities. And it just resonates with most people. If I'm calling you and I'm reading a script going, blah, 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 like some talking head, that I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. But if I'm talking to somebody, and you can't fake it, like you can't make it up. If I'm talking to somebody and I'm generally grateful that they're willing to spend their time with me and give me the opportunity to, pitch them, essentially, that most people will give it to you. And so it's actually a sales skill in a way, but it can't be contrived or it falls super flat and you just sound like cheesy and yucky.
Yeah. I think it's a skill also because some people might sit here and say, oh, I'm grateful, right? Like, I know I'm grateful, but communicating that gratitude is something that you can always improve on, right? Expressing that and actively thinking that when you're communicating with people, that's something everybody can do more of, right? And improve on as well. And that comes across on the phone more. Your energy, if you're grateful and in that mindset, is going to immediately be better when you're speaking with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had so much fun chatting with you today. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
It's probably a new milestone for both of us. I've certainly never done a LinkedIn Live before.
Me either. So happy we could have got through it together.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining.
Bye-bye.
Bye.